The bullet grazed so close to Nora Dawson's cheek that she felt the heat of it before she heard the crack of the rifle. And in that moment, she understood that her father's gambling debts would be paid one way or another, whether in gold or in blood. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the general store in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. It was the summer of 1882, and the town was still raw and wild despite the railroad having come through a few years back. Dust kicked up from the street as another shot rang out, this one embedding itself in the post near her head. "Dawson, we know you're in there somewhere." The voice belonged to Frank Mercer, one of the men her father had cheated at cards 3 weeks ago. Her father had disappeared the next morning, leaving Nora alone with nothing but a one-room shack on the edge of town and a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. Nora was 22 years old, tall and broad-shouldered like her mother had been, with a face that people called handsome rather than pretty. Her hands were large and capable, calloused from the work she had done trying to keep herself fed since her father left. She wore her dark hair in a simple braid down her back, and her dress was patched in 3 places. The women in town whispered about her behind their fans, about how no decent man would want a girl with her father's blood running through her veins, how she was too tall, too plain, too poor. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Nora waited, barely breathing, until she heard the sound of horses riding away. Only then did she dare to move, her legs shaking as she stepped out into the fading sunlight. "You all right, miss?" The voice came from behind her, deep and concerned. Nora spun around, her hand instinctively going to the small knife she kept tucked in her belt. The man standing there raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a Colt revolver on his hip, but his stance was relaxed, non-threatening. "I'm fine," Nora said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for your concern." "Those men were shooting at you. It wasn't a question. They were shooting near me. There's a difference." Nora straightened her spine, trying to regain some dignity. "I can handle my own troubles, mister." "I don't doubt it," the man said, and there was something in his tone that made Nora look at him more carefully. He wasn't mocking her. "Name's Xavier Quinn. Just rode into town about an hour ago. Nora Dawson." She watched his face carefully for any sign of recognition, any hint that he had already heard about her and her father. But Xavier's expression remained open, friendly even. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Dawson, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He glanced down the street where Mercer and his men had disappeared. "You got somewhere safe to go." Nora almost laughed at that. Safe. She hadn't felt safe since her mother died 5 years ago. "I have a place. Those men might come back. Then I'll deal with it when they do." She started to walk away, but Xavier fell into step beside her. "I'm not trying to intrude, Miss Dawson, but I've seen men like that before. They don't give up easy, especially if they think they are owed something." Nora stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me or my situation." Xavier was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the golden light of the setting sun. "Maybe not. But I know what it's like to be alone and to have people want to hurt you for something that wasn't your fault. And I know that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is accept help when it's offered." Something in his words struck a chord deep in Nora's chest. She wanted to refuse, to send him away and prove to herself and everyone else that she didn't need anyone. But the truth was she was scared. Mercer and his men wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and she had nothing to give them. "My father owes them money," she said finally, the words tasting bitter. "A lot of money, money I don't have. How much? $500. It might as well have been 5,000. Nora had barely $10 to her name. Xavier let out a low whistle. That's a hefty sum. He cheated them at cards, then he ran, left me here to face what he'd done. The anger in her voice surprised even her. She had spent weeks trying not to feel anything at all, trying to just survive day by day. That's a coward's way, Xavier said quietly. A man should face up to what he's done. Well, my father never was much of a man. Nora resumed walking, and again Xavier followed. They walked in silence for several minutes, past the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out into the street, past the church with its white painted cross, past the homes of respectable families who looked at Nora with a mixture of pity and disdain. Her shack sat at the very edge of town, a ramshackle structure that leaked when it rained and let in the cold wind in winter. Nora felt a flush of shame as they approached it, seeing it through Xavier's eyes. But when she glanced at him, his expression held no judgment. "This is me," she said, stopping at the gate that hung crooked on its hinges. "Miss Dawson," Xavier said, and she turned to look at him. "I'd like to help you if you'll let me." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You don't know me. Why would you want to help me?" Xavier smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Because from the moment I saw you standing there, facing down those men without flinching even though you were scared, I thought to myself that you were the bravest person I'd seen in a long time. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I've been traveling for 3 years, looking for a place to settle down, looking for a reason to stop running, and maybe this is it." Nora's heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter she had never felt before. "That's crazy. You don't even know me." "Then let me get to know you." Xavier took a step closer. "I've got some money saved up, not $500, but enough to make a start, and I'm good with my hands. I can work. We could figure something out together." "The whole town talks about me," Nora said, needing him to understand what he was offering to involve himself in. "They say I'm cursed, that I'm my father's daughter through and through. They say no decent man would want anything to do with me. Why would you be any different?" Xavier's expression grew serious. "Because I don't care what other people say. I care about what I see. And what I see is a woman who's been dealt a bad hand but who keeps standing up anyway. That takes strength, Miss Dawson. Real strength." Nora felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned long ago that crying didn't solve anything. "I can't pay you back. Not for a long time, maybe never. I'm not asking to be paid back. I'm asking if you'll let me help. As a friend, if nothing else." A friend. Nora couldn't remember the last time she'd had one of those. The girls she had grown up with had all married and started families, and they crossed the street when they saw her coming. The women at church smiled tight, false smiles, and made sure their husbands didn't look at her too long. She had been alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. "All right," she said softly, "but I'm going to help too. Whatever we do it together. I won't be beholden to anyone." Xavier's smile returned. "Fair enough. Together then." They shook hands, and Nora felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. He was a working man like her. Not fancy or refined, but real and solid. Over the next few days, Xavier proved to be a man of his word. He found work at the livery stable, mucking out stalls and tending horses, and he spent his evenings helping Nora fix up her shack. He replaced the broken boards in the roof and mended the gate. He never asked for anything in return, never made her feel like she owed him. The town noticed, of course. People talked. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, made pointed comments about propriety. Reverend Thomas mentioned something in his Sunday sermon about the appearance of impropriety being as damaging as the act itself. But Xavier seemed unbothered by it all, and his calm confidence helped Nora feel the same way. "Let them talk," he said one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. "Words can't hurt you unless you let them." "Easy for you to say," Nora replied, but there was no heat in it. "They're not talking about you." "Oh, they are," Xavier said with a slight laugh. "Mrs. Henderson asked me this morning what my intentions were toward you, told me that a young woman's reputation is a fragile thing." Nora felt her cheeks heat. "What did you tell her?" Xavier turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I told her that my intentions were honorable, and that you were the finest woman I'd ever met, and that the town was lucky to have you even if they were too blind to see it." For a moment, Nora couldn't speak. No one had ever defended her like that before. "Xavier, I don't," he said gently. "You don't have to say anything. I meant every word." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Nora found herself studying Xavier's profile in the fading light. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was a kindness in him, a steadiness that made her feel safe. It had been only a week since they met, but she felt like she had known him much longer. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything." "Why were you traveling for 3 years? What were you running from?" Xavier was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Then he sighed. "My family had a ranch in Wyoming. My father and we never saw eye to eye on anything. He wanted me to marry the daughter of a neighboring rancher, merge the properties. But I didn't love her and she didn't love me. When I refused, he said I was throwing away my inheritance, my future, said I was a fool. What did you do? I left. Took my horse and what money I had saved and just rode. Worked odd jobs here and there, never staying anywhere long. I kept thinking I'd find whatever it was I was looking for, but I never did. Until now." Until now. Nora's heart was beating faster. Xavier turned to face her fully. "Until I met you, Nora. The moment I saw you, standing there so brave and scared at the same time, something inside me just knew. This is it. This is where I'm supposed to be." Nora wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment and hurt had taught her to be cautious. "Xavier, we barely know each other. How can you be sure?" "I can't explain it," he admitted, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I know it sounds crazy, but it's like I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." Before Nora could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the evening air. They both stood, and Nora felt her stomach drop as she recognized Frank Mercer and his men riding up to her gate. There were 5 of them this time, and they all looked like they had been drinking. "Well, well," Mercer said, his words slightly slurred. "Looks like the Dawson girl found herself a protector." Xavier stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Nora. "What do you want, Mercer? You know my name." Mercer's smile was unpleasant. "Then you probably know why I'm here." "Her daddy owes me money and I aim to collect." "She doesn't have it," Xavier said calmly, "and she's not responsible for her father's debts." Mercer laughed and his men joined in. "That's not how I see it. A debt's a debt. If her daddy won't pay, then she will, one way or another." Nora felt Xavier tense beside her. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what?" One of Mercer's men, a scarred man named Tom, reached for his gun. "You going to stop all 5 of us, Cowboy, if I have to." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Nora's mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this that didn't end with someone getting shot. Then an idea came to her, desperate and probably foolish, but it was all she had. "Wait," she said, stepping around Xavier. "I'll get you your money." Xavier turned to her sharply. "Nora, you can't, not all at once," she continued, ignoring him. "But I can make payments. $50 a month until it's paid off. That's fair, isn't it?" Mercer stroked his mustache, considering. $50 a month is what, 10 months? That's a long time to wait." It's better than nothing, Nora said, trying to keep her voice steady. Which is what you'll get if you kill me or run me out of town. She's got a point, Frank, Tom said. And if she misses a payment, we can always come back. After what felt like an eternity, Mercer nodded. All right. $50 first of every month. But if you're even a day late, the deal's off and we take payment our own way. Understood. Understood, Nora said, though she had no idea how she was going to come up with $50 every month. Mercer and his men rode off, their laughter echoing in the darkness. As soon as they were out of sight, Nora's legs gave out and she sank down onto the porch steps. Xavier sat beside her, and she could feel the anger radiating off him. That was foolish, he said. You shouldn't have promised them anything. What else was I supposed to do? Let them shoot you? Let them burn down my house? Nora put her head in her hands. At least this buys us some time. Nora, $50 a month. How are you going to? I don't know. The words came out sharper than she intended. I don't know, Xavier, but I'll figure something out. I always do. Xavier was quiet for a moment, then he put his hand on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, comforting. We'll figure it out, together, remember. Nora looked up at him, and in the moonlight she could see the determination in his eyes. You should leave. This isn't your fight. You could get hurt or worse. I'm not leaving, Xavier said firmly. I told you, Nora, I've been waiting for you. I'm not going anywhere. The next few weeks were a blur of work. Nora took in laundry and mending, her fingers working late into the night by candlelight. Xavier continued at the livery and picked up extra work wherever he could find it. They pooled their money together, counting and recounting the coins and bills, watching the sums slowly grow. They also grew closer. Xavier started taking his meals with Nora, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the wide open spaces of Wyoming. She told him about her mother, who had died of fever, about the books she had loved to read as a child, about her dreams of maybe one day having a real home, a family. You'll have that, Xavier said one night as they sat at her small kitchen table. I promise you, Nora, you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. How can you promise that? She asked, but she was smiling. Because I'm going to make sure of it. He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, and Nora felt warmth spreading through her entire body. Xavier, she whispered, I'm scared. Of what? Of this. Of feeling this way about you. What if something happens? What if Mercer comes back and nothing's going to happen? Xavier said, but his expression was serious. And even if it did, even if the worst came to pass, I wouldn't regret a single moment I've spent with you. Nora felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for once they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of something else entirely, something she was almost afraid to name. I think I'm falling in love with you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Xavier stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. I know I'm falling in love with you, he said against her hair. I've been falling since the moment I saw you. He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Nora wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back. It was her first kiss, and it felt like everything she had imagined and more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Nora pulled back to look at him. What? Marry me, Nora. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I don't care. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Xavier, we don't have anything. We're barely scraping by as it is. How can we have each other? Xavier interrupted. That's more than a lot of people ever get. The rest we can figure out as we go. Please, Nora. Say yes. Nora looked into his eyes and saw her future there. It wasn't an easy future, she knew that. There would be struggles and hardships, but there would also be love, real and true and lasting. And wasn't that worth more than anything else? Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Xavier let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, making her laugh. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. We should do it soon, Xavier said. No point in waiting. The Reverend might not agree to marry us, Nora said, reality setting in. He doesn't approve of me. Then we'll find someone who will. We'll ride to the next town if we have to. Xavier cupped her face in his hands. Nothing is going to stop this, Nora. Nothing. They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace in a town 15 miles east of Scottsbluff. Nora wore a simple blue dress that she had mended and pressed until it looked almost new, and Xavier wore his cleanest shirt. They had no guests, no flowers, no fancy celebration. But when Xavier slipped a thin gold band on her finger and the justice pronounced them man and wife, Nora felt like the luckiest woman alive. That night, in the shack that was now their home, Xavier made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and when they finally lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Nora felt complete in a way she never had before. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Xavier replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Always. The first payment to Mercer came due 2 weeks after their wedding. They had managed to scrape together $53, $3 more than they needed. Nora felt a surge of pride as she handed over the money, seeing the surprise on Mercer's face. Well, I'll be, he said, counting the bills. Didn't think you had it in you. We'll have it every month, Xavier said firmly. You'll get your money, Mercer, all of it. Mercer nodded slowly. See that I do. As the months passed, Nora and Xavier fell into a rhythm. They worked hard, saved every penny they could, and somehow always managed to come up with the payment. It wasn't easy. There were nights when they went to bed hungry, days when they wondered how they would make it. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. The town's attitude toward Nora began to shift as well. Seeing her with Xavier, seeing the way he looked at her with such obvious love and respect, people started to reconsider their opinions. Mrs. Henderson stopped making pointed comments and actually smiled at Nora when they passed on the street. Some of the other women began to greet her at church, and a few even asked her to join their sewing circle. See, Xavier said one Sunday as they walked home from services. I told you they'd come around. It's only because of you, Nora said. Because you married me. It gave me respectability. No, Xavier said, stopping to face her. It's because they're finally seeing what I saw from the start, that you're strong and brave and good. I didn't give you respectability, Nora. You had that all along. You just needed people to open their eyes. 6 months into their marriage, on a cold December morning, Nora woke up feeling sick. She barely made it outside before she was retching into the bushes. Xavier held her hair back, his expression worried. Maybe we should get the doctor, he said. No, I'm fine, Nora said, wiping her mouth. It's probably just something I ate. But when the same thing happened the next morning and the morning after that, Nora began to suspect the truth. She went to see Dr. Matthews, an elderly man who had delivered half the babies in Scottsbluff. You're pregnant, Mrs. Quinn, he said after examining her. About 2 months along, I'd say. Nora felt a rush of emotion so strong she could barely breathe. Joy, fear, excitement, worry, all swirling together. Are you sure? Quite sure. You should tell your husband. He'll be pleased, I imagine. Nora walked home in a daze, trying to figure out how to break the news to Xavier. They had talked about children, of course, but always as something in the distant future. They were still trying to pay off her father's debt, still barely making ends meet. How could they afford a baby? But when Xavier came home that evening and saw her face, he knew something was different. "What is it?" he asked, taking her hands. "Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant," Nora blurted out, and then watched his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, Xavier just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyful that Nora felt her own fears melting away. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We're having a baby," he said, setting her down gently. "Nora, we're having a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy, I'm thrilled, I'm over the moon," he kissed her soundly. "This is the best news I've ever had." "But Xavier, the money, the debt, we'll figure it out," he said firmly. "We always do, and this baby, our baby, is going to be loved and cared for no matter what. I promise you that." Nora let herself believe him, let herself feel the joy she had been holding back. They were going to have a baby. She was going to be a mother. The pregnancy was hard. Nora was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. But Xavier was there every step of the way, bringing her water, holding her when she cried, telling her how brave she was. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They started preparing the small back room of the shack as a nursery, and Xavier built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate patterns into the wood. They made their payments to Mercer every month without fail, though it got harder as Nora's pregnancy advanced and she couldn't take in as much work. Xavier picked up extra shifts at the livery and did odd jobs around town. He never complained, never showed any sign of the stress Nora knew he must be feeling. In June of 1883, on a sweltering afternoon that made Nora feel like she was melting, the pain started. Xavier rode to get Dr. Matthews while Mrs. Henderson, who had become something of a friend, stayed with Nora and helped her through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult. Nora screamed and cried and cursed, and Xavier held her hand through all of it, whispering words of encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born. "A boy," Dr. Matthews announced, placing the squalling infant on Nora's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Nora looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. Xavier leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him James after Xavier's grandfather. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born he had both of them wrapped around his tiny fingers. Being parents changed them, but in good ways. Xavier became even more focused and driven, working harder than ever to provide for his family. Nora discovered a strength she didn't know she had, managing the household and caring for James while still contributing what she could financially. They were exhausted and overwhelmed, but they were also happier than they had ever been. When James was 3 months old, they made their 9th payment to Mercer. Only one more to go, and the debt would be paid in full. Nora allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. But then her father came back. Nora was hanging laundry in the yard, James sleeping in a basket in the shade, when she saw the familiar figure stumbling down the road. For a moment, she thought she was seeing things. But no, it was definitely him. Robert Dawson, looking even more worn and ragged than when he had left. "Nora," he said, his voice rough. "Nora, girl, I'm home." All the anger, all the hurt and betrayal she had been holding in for over a year came flooding out. "Home? You call this home? You left me here to clean up your mess. You ran like a coward and left me to face those men alone." Her father flinched but didn't argue. I know, I was wrong, but I'm back now and I aim to make things right." "How? How are you going to make things right?" Nora was shaking with rage. Do you have any idea what I've been through, what I've had to do?" "I heard you got married," her father said, glancing at the house. "To that cowboy who rode into town last year. His name is Xavier, and he's more of a man than you'll ever be." Nora stepped between her father and the basket where James slept, protective. "He was there for me when you weren't. He helped me when everyone else told me I was cursed because of you." Robert's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Nora. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm asking for a chance to make amends." "You can start by getting out of my sight," Nora said coldly. "You're not welcome here." But before Robert could respond, Xavier came around the corner of the house. He took one look at the scene and moved immediately to Nora's side. "Is this him?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Nora said, "and he was just leaving." Xavier studied Robert for a long moment. "Where have you been?" "Colorado," Robert said. "Denver. I thought I could win the money back, thought I could come back and pay Mercer myself, but I just got in deeper." "So you came back with nothing?" Xavier's voice was hard. "No, I came back because I heard about my daughter, heard she married and had a baby. I came back because she's all the family I have left, and I wanted to see her." Robert's voice broke. "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to see my grandson." Nora felt her resolve wavering. She wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold onto her rage and use it to push him away. But part of her, the part that remembered her father before the gambling took over, the part that remembered him swinging her around when she was a little girl, that part wanted to forgive him. "Nora," Xavier said softly, "it's your choice. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." She looked at her father, really looked at him. He was thin, almost gaunt, and his clothes hung off him. There were new lines in his face, and his eyes held a sadness she had never seen before. "One chance," she said finally. "You get one chance to prove you're serious about making amends. But if you mess up, if you lie or cheat or run again, that's it. You're out of my life for good." Robert's face lit up with hope. "Thank you, Nora, thank you. I won't let you down, I swear it." "We'll see," Nora said, still wary. Over the next few weeks, Robert proved to be true to his word. He found work at the grain mill and gave most of his earnings to Nora and Xavier for the final payment to Mercer. He was gentle with James, his grandson, holding him with a tenderness that surprised Nora. And he stayed sober, not touching a drop of whiskey even when some of his old drinking buddies tried to tempt him. "I think he really is trying," Xavier said one night as they lay in bed. "I didn't think he had it in him, but he's actually trying." "I want to believe it," Nora said, "but I'm scared to hope. What if he's just playing us? What if he leaves again? Then we deal with it if it happens. But for now, let's give him the benefit of the doubt." Xavier pulled her closer. "Besides, James seems to like him." It was true. James would coo and smile when Robert held him, reaching up to grab his grandfather's finger. And Robert, for his part, seemed transformed by the baby's affection. He was softer somehow, more present. The day they made the final payment to Mercer was one of celebration. Nora, Xavier, and Robert walked into the saloon where Mercer usually spent his afternoons, and Nora counted out the $50 with a steady hand. "There," she said. "That's all of it. We're square." Mercer counted the money, then nodded. "Debt's paid." He looked at Robert. "You got lucky, Dawson. You got a daughter who's worth more than you deserve." "Don't I know it?" Robert said quietly. As they walked out of the saloon, Nora felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. It was over. The debt was paid and they were free. "What do you say we have a real celebration?" Xavier suggested. "Dinner at the hotel restaurant, can we afford it?" Nora asked, though she was smiling. "For this, absolutely." They ate roasted chicken and potatoes and pie for dessert, and James slept contentedly through the whole meal. People stopped by their table to congratulate them, to tell them what an inspiration they were. Nora felt tears in her eyes as she looked around at her husband, her son, even her father. This was her family. This was what she had been fighting for. That night, after Robert had gone back to the room he was renting above the general store and James was asleep in his cradle, Nora and Xavier sat on their porch and watched the stars. "You remember when we first met?" Nora asked. "When you said you'd been traveling for 3 years, looking for a place to settle down." "I remember," Xavier said. "You think you found it? Are you happy here?" Xavier turned to look at her, and in the starlight she could see the love shining in his eyes. "Happy? Nora, I'm more than happy. I'm home. You're my home. You and James. I could be anywhere in the world, and as long as you're with me, I'd be home." Nora kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Xavier murmured against her lips. "Always." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Robert continued to work at the mill and proved himself reliable. He never asked Nora and Xavier for anything, but he was always there when they needed help. He doted on James, and as the boy grew, the bond between grandfather and grandson deepened. Xavier was offered a permanent position at the livery with a good salary, and Nora was able to cut back on the laundry work and focus more on their home and family. They saved up enough money to make some real improvements to the house, adding a second bedroom and fixing the roof properly. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was filled with love. When James was 2 years old, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with pure joy and no fear. They were in a better place now, financially and emotionally. They could handle another child. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1885, a tiny thing with wispy blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn hazel like her grandmother's had been. They named her Margaret, after Nora's mother, and called her Maggie. Robert cried when he held her for the first time. "She looks just like your mama," he told Nora. "Just like her." Watching her father with Maggie, seeing the love and regret in his eyes, Nora finally let go of the last of her anger. He had made mistakes, terrible ones, but he was trying to make up for them. And maybe that was all anyone could do. The years passed quickly. James grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses and adventure. Maggie was sweet-tempered and gentle, always picking flowers and singing little songs. Xavier's work at the livery turned into a partnership when the owner decided to retire and offered to sell Xavier half the business. With Robert's help and a loan from the bank, they made it happen. Nora started teaching children to read and write in their home, charging a small fee. She loved it, loved seeing the way their faces lit up when they mastered a new word or finished their first book. The extra income was nice too, helping them to build up real savings for the first time in their lives. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Nora with a small piece of land just outside town. It wasn't much, just a few acres, but it had a creek running through it and good soil. "I thought we could build a real house here," he said as they stood looking out over the property, James and Maggie running through the grass. "Nothing fancy, but something bigger than the shack, room for the kids to grow." Nora turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You really want to do this?" "I want to build a life with you," Xavier said. "A real, permanent life. No more scraping by, no more wondering if we'll make it. I want to give you and the kids everything you deserve." They broke ground on the new house that summer. Robert helped with the construction, and some of the men from town volunteered their time too. It took nearly a year, but when it was finished, it was beautiful. 2 stories with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a wood stove, and a parlor with windows that let in the morning sun. Moving day was chaotic and wonderful. James and Maggie ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the walls. Robert helped carry furniture, and several of the women from town came to help Nora arrange everything and hang curtains. That night, After the children were asleep in their new rooms and Robert had gone back to his own small house in town, Nora and Xavier stood in their bedroom and looked at each other in amazement. "We did it," Nora said. "We really did it." "You did it," Xavier corrected. "Your strength, your determination, that's what got us here." "No," Nora said firmly. "We did it together. You were the one who stopped and helped me when everyone else told me I was hopeless. You were the one who saw something in me worth saving." Xavier cupped her face in his hands. "I didn't save you, Nora. You saved yourself. I just loved you while you did it." They made love that night in their new bed, in their new house, and Nora felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but always more joy than sorrow. James started helping Xavier at the livery when he was 8, learning everything his father could teach him about horses and business. Maggie showed a talent for music and convinced Xavier to buy her a small piano, which she practiced on for hours every day. Robert remained sober and continued to work, though his body was starting to show the wear of a hard life. He spent every Sunday with them, eating dinner and playing with his grandchildren. He never talked much about the past, but sometimes Nora would catch him watching her with a look of profound regret and gratitude. "I'm proud of you, girl," he told her one Sunday evening as they sat on the porch. "Proud of the woman you've become, the life you've built. I know I had nothing to do with it, but I'm proud anyway." "You're here now," Nora said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "That counts for something." When Nora was 30 years old, she found herself pregnant for the 3rd time. It was unexpected, as both James and Maggie were nearly grown, but not unwelcome. Xavier was thrilled, and the children were excited at the prospect of a new baby in the house. This pregnancy was harder than the others. Nora was older now, and her body didn't bounce back as easily. But she was also wiser, more patient with herself. And she had Xavier, who fussed over her like she was made of glass. Their second son was born on a cold November night in 1893. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and angry, and Xavier laughed with delight. "He's got your fighting spirit," he told Nora as she cradled the baby. They named him Robert after Nora's father, who cried unabashedly when they told him. "I don't deserve this," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve to have my name carried on." "You've earned it," Nora said firmly. "You made mistakes, but you fixed them. You stayed. That matters." James was 14 by then, already taller than Xavier and showing signs of the man he would become. He was gentle with his baby brother, protective and patient. Maggie, 12 and full of pre-adolescent energy, appointed herself the baby's guardian and could often be found singing him to sleep with lullabies she made up. The new baby brought a fresh energy to the household. Nora found herself falling in love with motherhood all over again, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, breathing in that special baby smell. Xavier was even more besotted, spending hours just holding his son and talking to him about everything and nothing. "You know he can't understand you, right?" James teased his father one afternoon. "Doesn't matter," Xavier replied, not taking his eyes off the baby. "He will someday, and when he does, I want him to know his father's voice." Life continued its steady march forward. The livery business thrived, and Xavier eventually bought out his partner's share completely. James worked there full-time after finishing school, showing a natural talent for training horses. Maggie gave piano lessons to the children in town, and her music filled the house with beauty. Robert Sr., as they had taken to calling Nora's father to distinguish him from the baby, began to slow down. His hair went fully white, and his hands developed a tremor. The doctor said it was just age catching up with him, but Nora worried. She convinced him to move into their house, into one of the spare bedrooms, so she could keep an eye on him. "You don't have to do this," he protested weakly. "I know," Nora said, "but I want to. Your family, Dad." It was the first time she had called him that in years, and she saw the way his eyes filled with tears. Having her father in the house was surprisingly easy. He helped with little Bobby, as they called the baby, and his presence seemed to give the household a sense of completeness. He would sit for hours with Bobby on his lap, telling him stories about when Nora was a little girl, before everything went wrong. On Bobby's second birthday, they had a party with cake and presents and all the children from town. Watching her family around her, her husband and children and father all happy and healthy, Nora felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just how far we've come," Nora said, leaning into him. "Do you remember that first night when you told me you'd been waiting for me?" "I remember everything about that night," Xavier said. "The way the sun was setting behind you, the way you looked at me like you couldn't decide if I was crazy or dangerous." "Maybe both," Nora said with a laugh. "Maybe." Xavier turned her to face him. "But I meant what I said then, and I mean it now. I had been waiting for you, even though I didn't know it, and every day since has been better than the last because I get to spend it with you." They kissed, and Nora heard Maggie making exaggerated gagging sounds while James laughed. "You two are embarrassing," Maggie called out. "Get used to it," Xavier called back. "You're never too old to kiss your wife." As Bobby grew, he revealed a personality all his own. He was fearless and adventurous, always getting into things he shouldn't. He worshipped his older brother and followed James everywhere, much to the teenager's alternating annoyance and delight. He loved music like his sister and would dance whenever Maggie played the piano. Robert Sr. died peacefully in his sleep when Bobby was 4 years old. They found him in the morning, lying in his bed with a slight smile on his face. Nora grieved, but it was a clean grief, uncomplicated by anger or regret. He had made his peace with his past, and so had she. They buried him in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Scottsbluff, and the whole town came to the funeral. People told stories about Robert, about how he had changed in his final years, about his devotion to his family. Nora held Xavier's hand through it all, grateful beyond words that she had him by her side. Life moved on, as it always does. James fell in love with a girl named Sarah, the daughter of the doctor, and they were married when he was 21. They built a house near the livery and soon had children of their own, making Nora and Xavier grandparents. Maggie became the most sought-after music teacher in 3 counties, and her reputation brought students from as far away as Omaha. She was in no hurry to marry, she said, perfectly content with her music and her family. Bobby started school and proved to be as bright as his siblings, with a particular love for numbers and figures. Xavier joked that he would probably end up running the business side of the livery someday. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Nora on a trip. They left the children with James and Sarah and took the train to Denver, something they never would have imagined being able to afford in those early days. They stayed in a real hotel with velvet curtains and had dinner in restaurants with white tablecloths. They walked through the city holding hands like young sweethearts, and Nora felt 17 instead of 42. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "Marrying me, I mean, taking on all my problems." Xavier looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Regret it? Nora, marrying you was the best decision I ever made, the only decision that really mattered. But we struggled so much in the beginning. We had nothing." "We had each other," Xavier said firmly. "That was never nothing. And look at us now. We have 3 beautiful children, a successful business, a home we built with our own hands. We have a life, Nora. A real, full, wonderful life." "How could I regret any of that?" Nora kissed him, there on the balcony of the hotel with the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "I love you," she whispered. "More than I could ever say." "I love you too," Xavier replied. "Always have, always will." They returned home to find that Bobby had lost his first tooth and was convinced the tooth fairy had forgotten him because they were away. Xavier slipped a coin under his pillow that night, and the next morning Bobby's excited shouts woke the whole house. The seasons continued to turn. James and Sarah had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Maggie eventually fell in love with a violinist who came through town with a traveling orchestra, and they were married in a ceremony filled with music. Bobby grew tall and strong, with Xavier's dark hair and Nora's gray eyes and a smile that could charm anyone. When Nora turned 50, Xavier threw her a party that seemed to include half of Nebraska. People came from all over, former students and friends and family. There were speeches and toasts and so much laughter that Nora's sides hurt. "To Nora," Xavier said, raising his glass. "The strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every single day." Everyone drank to that, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face. These were her people, her community. The same town that had once shunned her now celebrated her. And it was all because of Xavier, because he had seen her worth when no one else did, because he had loved her when everyone told her she was unlovable. The years rolled on, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Xavier's hair went gray, then white, and Nora's hands developed the same tremor her father's had. But they were still in love, still finishing each other's sentences and holding hands on the porch swing. Bobby took over the livery business when Xavier retired, running it with the same dedication his father had. James helped when he could, and several of the grandsons worked there too. It became truly a family business, a legacy. One quiet evening, when Nora was 68 and Xavier was 70, they sat on that same porch where he had proposed all those years ago. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked, gesturing to the scene before them. "All of this," Xavier thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly. "I knew I loved you, knew I wanted a life with you, but this exceeded every dream I ever had." "Mine too," Nora said softly. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and home. "They told me no cowboy would want me, you know, back before you came. The women in town, they said I was cursed, that I'd end up alone." "I remember you telling me that," Xavier said. "What did I say back then?" Nora smiled. "You said you'd been waiting for me." "I had been," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I just didn't know it until I found you, and then everything made sense. All the wandering, all the searching, it was all leading me to you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the house, they could hear Maggie playing the piano, the same one they had bought her all those years ago. The melody drifted out through the open windows, sweet and clear. "I would do it all again," Nora said suddenly. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear. I'd do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "Me too," Xavier said, in a heartbeat. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their great-grandchildren were called inside for supper. Bobby came out to check on them, his own hair starting to show threads of gray now. "You two all right out here?" he asked. "Perfect," Xavier said, and Nora nodded in agreement. "Just perfect." Bobby smiled and went back inside, and Nora and Xavier were left alone under the vast Nebraska sky. The same sky they had courted under, married under, raised their children under. The same sky that had witnessed every joy and sorrow of their lives together. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for everything." Xavier turned to look at her, and even in the fading light she could see the love shining in his eyes. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for choosing me every day since." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and commitment and partnership. And sitting there in the twilight, surrounded by the life they had built together, Nora Dawson Quinn knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The Wild West had been hard and unforgiving, but it had also given her everything that mattered. A home, a family, a love that had weathered every storm and come out stronger. The girl who had been told no cowboy would want her had found a man who had been waiting for her all along. And together, they had built something beautiful. Inside the house, their family gathered around the dinner table, 3 generations sharing a meal and making memories. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, constant and eternal, watching over a love story that had started with a single act of kindness and grown into something extraordinary. Nora and Xavier eventually went inside to join their family, but they held hands as they walked, fingers intertwined the way they had been for over 45 years. And as they took their seats at the head of the table, surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that were their legacy, they shared a smile that said everything words could not. This was what they had fought for. This was what they had built together. And it was more than enough. It was everything.